Hi, this is our pre-reading lecture for our reading by Boulton, in which we will be talking about the invention of the concept of race. So before you guys jump into this reading, I wanted to just give a quick kind of wrap up and reminder of what we discussed last week, and then kind of give an overview of Enlightenment theories of race. Where do they come from? How do they develop? And then a few questions to keep in mind as you read Boulton and in preparation for the discussion board that you all will do after you read Boulton. Okay, so last week we were talking about artificial intelligence, and we were talking about this desire among these Enlightenment scientists to define what is special about life, what is special about humans. Is there something unique or undefinable or unsimulatable about being alive or about being human? So we talked a lot about how many of these experiments in artificial intelligence, from the duck to the fake chess player, were declared to be frauds and failures. And so the failures of these forms of quote-unquote mechanical life kind of point to the idea that maybe there is something special about being alive. Maybe there is something special about human intelligence and reason as well. So on the other hand, we also want to think about what Riskin discusses at the end of her article. When we see these experiments in artificial intelligence applied to particularly the textile industry or industrial capitalism more broadly, we see this conversation around human value shifting. So whereas these early experiments sort of held out hope for a certain special quality to humanness and to life, what we see happening with the introduction of the automatic loom is this increasing trend towards outsourcing skilled labor, removing this high-level, high-skill worker in the context of the textile industry, the weaver, the designer, and creating these new quote-unquote de-skilled forms of labor that are declared to be less valuable. So we're seeing the way that the kind of technology that develops out of these earlier more entertainment-oriented versions of artificial intelligence are then applied to industrial capitalism as a way to lower the bottom line and as a way to devalue the workers that are required to make sure that this new technology can continue to work. So they're able to get rid of the intelligent, high-value, high-skilled designer and weaver and replace them with this automatic loom, and then create this new type of work, this kind of technology-adjacent form of work that is declared to be low-level, low-skill, low-value. Okay. So this is a quote from Riskin. So certain human occupations came to seem, less human and others more human according to what machines could and could not do. So this creates a hierarchy that is putting mental labor on top and physical labor on the bottom. So this kind of ranking of types of labor that we see being invented during this early industrial era continues to shape our wage structure today, as we talked about quite a bit. And so what we want to think about here is that not only does it impact the wage structure and how much you are able to earn, it also impacts the way that the people that do physical work are valued, not just monetarily, but socially and culturally as well. And so that idea is one that we want to carry forward into our discussion this week as we begin to talk about the invention of race as well. We're going to see some intersections in this creation of a hierarchy of human values. Okay, so moving forward, let's talk about the invention of race. So we're going to look at this both this week and next week, this sense that race is something that needs to be invented. It is not a fact. And in fact, what we want to think about here is that the construct of race emerges out of this period in which European powers are expanding their colonial empires, which starts way back in the 16th century. And we see this expansion in taking over territories overseas, in the Americas, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. We are talking about this era of colonial expansion. And so with colonial expansion comes these encounters with human difference. So meeting people that are different from those that you have been accustomed to seeing in your life in Europe. So when we're thinking about these European-derived theories of racial difference, they have their roots in this unequal relationship, in this unequal vantage point. That theories of racial difference are constructed from the vantage point of a colonizing force. And the vantage point of the colonizing force, as we'll get into a little bit more extensively this week and next, are seeking people and natural resources as items to be exploited for their gain. And so there's a certain desire to create a narrative that justifies this exploitation. So what we're going to look at both this week and next is the way that science and the social sciences are essentially recruited to help justify this exploitation. Okay, so when we're thinking about the Enlightenment invention of race, we are starting to see the codification of ideas that have been floating around since the early colonial period and age of empire that are now being put into this Enlightenment viewpoint that we talked about last time as well. This desire to categorize all human knowledge, this valuation of progress, and this desire to use empirical science to create knowledge. And again, right, empiricism is that idea that you have to see it to believe it. So your observations are allegedly helping you come to conclusions. So there's a few people that I'm going to mention that were significant in terms of how Jefferson started to think about race, which is what our article focuses on. So Linnaeus is a theorist who is working in the 18th century, and he's trying to create a way to scientifically differentiate people, to apply the early kind of biological sciences and botanical sciences that he was working with and apply that theory to differentiating people. So his theories start with the idea that humans were a single species. However, he kind of begins and ends his research with this value judgment that puts his own culture, Christian European culture, as obviously from his perspective the highest form of civilization. So he's working with a bias as he began to structure his theory of human difference. This other guy, Blumenbach, who's working just a few decades later, had a different kind of theory. In fact, he theorized that the human race was a series of distinctly separate and unequal varieties. So instead of thinking about this sense of a single species, Blumenbach was like, no, everyone's too different. How could we possibly be part of the same race? So as this kind of more formal and more codified invention of Enlightenment definitions of race come together, we see that Linnaeus's theory kind of rises to the top as the one that is most agreed upon. Okay. So when we're looking at Linnaeus and Buffon, they're both influential in terms of how Jefferson's starting to think about race. So their two perspectives kind of informed Jefferson's theories. He's kind of borrowing from both in order to make sense of what is going on in terms of early American race relations. So Linnaeus argues that species are fixed and stable, whereas Buffon sees them as constantly in flux. And so Jefferson enjoys and thinks about that idea of ceaseless change that Buffon observes. And so what Buffon kind of describes is that natural and social conditions are the things that produce human diversity. So people are different due to their environments is the kind of argument that Buffon comes forward. So what we're seeing here is that Jefferson is acknowledging the existence of human diversity, but then after he says, okay, there is human diversity, then the question is, what are we going to do about it? So his conclusions about what to do about the fundamental human differences that he observes develop these categories of race in relationship to the creation of quote-unquote scientific theories of race and how those work inside of state building practices, so building up laws and things of that nature as well. So one of Jefferson's theories that you guys will read about a bit in the article, Jefferson suggests that Europeans and Native Americans have a shared ancestry, whereas the people of African descent are fundamentally and categorically different. So not only is he trying to define and codify human difference, he's like, well, these people are more different than these other people, right? So he's creating a kind of hierarchy around who is most distinct from, right, his own perspective as a European person as well. Okay, so when we're thinking about the book that is at the center of Boulton's article, Notes on Virginia, he feels as though he is being a good Enlightenment scientist, and that he's bringing science to bear to make sense of what is going on in the early United States around these issues of racial difference and the institution of slavery. And so what we see happening with Jefferson is that it creates new categories of human worth that are significant and wide-reaching in their impact. So what we are thinking about here is that, remember last time we had this idea that Descartes was kind of like, yeah, we can like observe nature and the mechanics of life, but these definitions of humanness are better left to poets or philosophers. Well, Jefferson's like, no, science can do it too. So he's asking for science to kind of help him define these new categories of human worth or human value. Okay. So here are a few questions to keep in mind as you all are reading Boulton's article. So where is he observing and gathering his conclusions about individuals of African descent? Why does this matter? How does this impact the credibility of his conclusions? And then how do these conclusions from long ago continue to impact American life today? Okay, so keep those in mind, read Boulton, and complete the discussion board. I look forward to talking with all of you later this week. Okay, take care.